You know, it's funny how a quiet life can be turned completely upside down. Not by some grand, earth-shattering event, but by something small, something so ridiculous, so utterly absurd, that you'd think it was a joke. In my case, it all started with a single, 2-foot-tall, ceramic garden gnome. His name was Norman. Yeah, I named him. Norman the gnome. He had a cheerful, slightly vacant smile, a bright red pointy hat, and he was holding a tiny fishing pole, forever optimistic about catching a fish in a sea of green grass. He wasn't just a piece of ceramic to me. He was a memory. He was the last gift my wife, Emily, ever gave me. We'd moved into the Pleasant Meadows subdivision about 5 years ago. And yes, the name is just as painfully generic as it sounds. It's one of those master plan communities where every lawn is cut to the exact same height, every mailbox is identical, and the color palette for your house is chosen from a pre-approved list of 3 shades of beige. It was quiet, it was safe, and after Emily passed away 2 years ago, that quiet was, well, it was both a comfort and a curse. The house felt empty. The garden, which she had loved so much, started to look a little sad. So one day I was cleaning out the garage and I found the box. Inside, wrapped in old newspaper, was Norman. Emily had bought him for me as a gag gift for my 40th birthday. She'd said, "Every grumpy old man needs a cheerful gnome to balance him out." We'd laughed so hard. Seeing him again, it was like a little spark of her humor, of her light, came back into the house. So, I took him out of the box, dusted him off, and I placed him right in the middle of the flower bed she had planted with her own hands. He looked perfect. He was a tiny beacon of color and silliness in a world that had become very gray. For the first time in a long time, looking out of my front yard made me smile. And that, apparently, was a federal crime in the eyes of the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association. The first shot was fired about a week later. It wasn't a cannonball. It was a single, crisp, white envelope tucked under my doormat. No stamp. Hand-delivered. That's how you know it's from the HOA. It saves them 68 cents and gives them the pleasure of physically trespassing on your property to deliver bad news. I opened it up. The letterhead was stark and imposing. Pleasant Meadows HOA. Board of Directors. The text was cold, impersonal, and dripping with passive aggression. "Dear resident of 124 Maple Creek Lane," it began. "It has come to our attention that a violation of the community bylaws has occurred on your property. Please refer to Bylaw Section C, Paragraph 12, Subsection B, Lawn and Garden Ornaments." It went on. All lawn and garden decorations, including but not limited to statuary, fountains, and figurines, must be pre-approved by the Architectural Control Committee to ensure they maintain the aesthetic harmony of the community. Unapproved items are subject to immediate removal. You have 14 days to rectify this violation to avoid further action. I read it twice. 3 times. A violation? For a garden gnome? I thought it had to be a mistake. A joke. I mean, my neighbor to the left had one of those metal spinning things that looked like a reject from a sci-fi movie, and the guy across the street had a giant decorative rock with his house number on it. How was my little Norman any different? I decided to just ignore it. It was probably an automated letter, some kind of mistake. They weren't serious. They couldn't be. Oh, how wrong I was. Exactly 1 week later, I was watering Emily's hydrangeas when a shadow fell over me. I looked up, and there she was. The final boss of Pleasant Meadows. The source of all things beige and boring. Brenda. Brenda was the HOA president. She was a woman who looked like she ironed her blue jeans. Her hair was a helmet of blonde spray. Her posture was ramrod straight, and her eyes were constantly scanning for imperfections. She carried a clipboard like a royal scepter, and she was currently staring down at Norman with a look of profound disgust, as if he had personally insulted her ancestors. "Good morning," I said, trying to be neighborly. "That's a matter of opinion," she clipped, not even looking at me. Her gaze was still fixed on Norman. "I see you haven't rectified the situation." "The situation?" I asked, playing dumb. She finally turned her cold eyes on me. "The figurine. You received the notice, I presume?" I delivered it myself. "Oh, the letter," I said with a little laugh. "Yeah, I got it. I thought it was some kind of mistake. I mean, it's a garden gnome." Brenda did not laugh. I don't think the muscles in her face were capable of forming a smile. "It is an unapproved lawn ornament, Mr. Harrison, and it's tacky." It lowers the tone of the entire street. Tacky. My wife gave me this gnome. This little piece of joy. And this woman, this beige tyrant, was calling it tacky. Something inside me, a little protective spark, ignited. Well, Brenda, I said, my voice a little firmer now. I like him. He's staying. Her eyes narrowed. The bylaws are not suggestions, Mr. Harrison. They are rules. Rules that you agreed to when you bought your house. They protect our property values. Ah, yes. The holy grail of the HOA. Property values. The excuse for every petty act of tyranny. You can want to paint your front door a shade of off-white instead of eggshell, and they tell you it would send the entire neighborhood into a financial death spiral. I don't think a 2-foot gnome is going to crash the housing market, Brenda, I said. It's not just the gnome, she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were letting me in on a dark secret. It's the precedent. If we let you have a gnome, what's next? Mr. Henderson will want pink flamingos. The Miller family will put up a life-sized Bigfoot statue. It's a slippery slope to chaos. We must maintain standards. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Norman. You have 7 days left on your notice period. If it's not gone by then, you will be issued a fine of $100. And the fines double for every week of noncompliance. She turned on her heel and marched away, her clipboard held high, leaving me standing there, fuming. $100? For a gnome? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her words. Tacky. Slippery slope to chaos. It wasn't about the gnome anymore. It was about control. It was about this woman and the board she controlled, having the power to legislate happiness out of our lives. They wanted a neighborhood of sterile, identical boxes, and my little spark of joy, my little memory of Emily, didn't fit into their master plan. The next day, I went to talk to my neighbor, Arthur. He's a sweet old guy, retired, been living here for 20 years. If anyone knew the score, it was him. I found him tending his prize-winning roses. Arthur, I began, can I ask you something about the HOA? His face immediately clouded over. Oh, son, what has the Queen decreed now? I told him the whole story. The letter, the confrontation with Brenda, the threat of a $100 fine. He just shook his head, snipping a dead leaf off a rose bush. Let me tell you a story, he said. 2 years ago, my wife bought me a new bird bath for our anniversary. It was a lovely stone one, had a little cherub on top. Brenda said it was 2 inches taller than the maximum allowed height for water features. 2 inches. She made me take it down. Said it was a hazard. A hazard. What was going to happen? Were the birds going to get vertigo? He sighed. That woman lives for this. When her husband was still around, she was a bit more relaxed. But ever since he left, well, the HOA became her entire kingdom. And we are her long-suffering subjects. My advice, just take the gnome down. It's not worth the fight. She'll make your life a living hell. She'll measure your grass with a ruler. She'll cite you if your garbage can is visible from the street for more than 12 hours. She never, ever gives up. I went home feeling defeated. Arthur was right. It wasn't worth it. For the next few days, I'd look out the window at Norman, and my heart would sink. I knew I had to take him down. It was the sensible thing to do. The path of least resistance. On the final day of my notice period, I went outside. It was a gray, overcast afternoon, which matched my mood perfectly. I walked over to the flower bed, looked Norman in his cheerful, painted eyes, and apologized. I reached down to pull him out of the ground. And then, I stopped. My hand was hovering over his little red hat. And I thought of Emily. I thought her laugh. I thought of her telling me to stop being such a grumpy old man. And then I thought of Brenda's smug, triumphant face, imagining her marching past my house tomorrow, nodding in satisfaction at my compliance, and my perfectly manicured, joyless, approved yard. And something snapped. No, absolutely not. This wasn't just about a gnome anymore. This was my home. This was Emily's garden. This was my last little connection to her joy. And I was not going to let some power-tripping, clipboard-wielding tyrant take that away from me. Not for $100. Not for 1,000. I stood up straight. Arthur's words echoed in my head. She never, ever gives up. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. Well, I thought. Neither do I. I went back inside, but I didn't go to the living room to mope. I went straight to my computer. I opened up a web browser, and I typed in 3 simple words: garden gnomes for sale. My initial plan was just to prove a point. Maybe buy 2 or 3 more. A little family for Norman. A small, polite act of defiance. But as I scrolled through the pages, a new, much more glorious, much more unhinged idea began to form. There were so many kinds. There were gnomes holding signs that said, "Go away." There were gnomes riding snails. There were zombie gnomes, ninja gnomes, and even a gnome that looked suspiciously like a rock star, complete with a tiny leather jacket and a guitar. I saw a pack of 10 gnomes in classic poses. I added it to my cart. I saw a set of 4 game of gnomes sitting on a tiny iron throne. Add to cart. I saw a gnome mooning an unseen enemy. Oh, that one was perfect. Add to cart. I saw a female gnome with a rolling pin, a gnome doing yoga, a gnome on a motorcycle. Add to cart. Add to cart. Add to cart. My defiance was growing exponentially with every click. The initial $100 fine seemed like a distant memory. This was no longer about defending Norman. This was about building an army. I kept going. I found bulk suppliers, websites that sold gnomes by the dozen. I was in a frenzy of malicious compliance. My cursor was a blur. I was laughing like a madman. I could already picture Brenda's face. The sheer, unadulterated shock. The sputtering rage. It was the most satisfying feeling I'd had in years. I didn't stop until my shopping cart total hit 99. 99 new gnomes. With Norman already on duty, that would make an even 100. I hovered over the complete purchase button. This was the point of no return. This was escalating things from a minor skirmish to all-out war. My bank account was about to take a serious hit. But the thought of the coming suburban apocalypse, the sheer, beautiful chaos I was about to unleash upon Pleasant Meadows, it was worth every single penny. I clicked the button. A confirmation screen popped up. Thank you for your order. Your 99 new friends will be arriving in 3 to 5 business days. The war had begun, and the first wave of reinforcements was on its way. All Brenda had to do was wait. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I felt like a general waiting for D-Day. Every time a delivery truck rumbled down my street, my heart would leap into my throat. I paid my first $100 fine online, along with a note in the comment section that simply said, "Worth it." I imagine Brenda seeing that, a small puff of steam coming out of her ears. That was just the appetizer. The main course was coming. Meanwhile, I prepared the battlefield. I went to the hardware store and bought bags of mulch, landscape fabric, and a set of those little solar-powered spotlights. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it with style. This wasn't going to be a messy protest. It was going to be an art installation, a masterpiece of petty revenge. Then, on a sunny Thursday afternoon, it happened. A massive, bright yellow delivery truck pulled up in front of my house. It wasn't the usual Amazon or UPS van. This was a serious freight truck. The driver hopped out, looked at his manifest, and then looked at my house with a bewildered expression. He opened the back of the truck, and I swear a heavenly light shone down. Box after box after box, all with fragile warnings and little pictures of gnomes on them. My army had arrived. The driver helped me unload them onto my driveway. It took nearly 20 minutes. We stacked them up, a veritable cardboard fortress. He just shook his head, a grin on his face. "Man," he said, "either you're opening a store, or you really, really like gnomes." "It's a long story," I replied, handing him a tip. "Let's just say I'm a passionate collector." As soon as he drove away, I got to work. It was Operation Norman Freedom. I worked with the precision of a military strategist, unboxing my ceramic soldiers one by one. I set them up in regiments. The classic, cheerful gnomes were the front line, placed right along the sidewalk in the freshly laid mulch. The ninja gnomes were positioned behind the rose bushes, peeking out as if on a covert mission. The zombie gnomes, with their pale faces and outstretched hands, I placed in a tight, shambling horde near the base of my oak tree. The game of gnomes throne got its own special pedestal right next to my front steps. I placed the mooning gnome so he was aimed perfectly at Brenda's house across the street. It was a work of art, and in the very center, elevated slightly on a small amount of dirt, I placed the original, Norman, the patriarch, the one who started it all. I positioned the new solar spotlights to illuminate the entire scene. I finished just as the sun began to set. I stepped back to the sidewalk to admire my handiwork. My entire front lawn was gone. In its place was a sprawling, multifaceted, and utterly glorious gnome society. It was breathtaking. It was absurd. It was beautiful. I went inside, poured myself a nice, stiff drink, and sat in my armchair by the window, waiting. The show was about to begin. As dusk fell, the solar lights flickered on, bathing my new ceramic population in a dramatic, ethereal glow. It didn't take long. First came the dog walkers. They'd stop, stare, do a double take, and then burst out laughing. People were pulling out their phones, taking pictures. A car slowed down, then pulled over. Soon, a small crowd of my neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering. I saw Arthur among them, his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking with silent laughter. He caught my eye through the window and gave me a slow, approving nod. But I was waiting for the main event. And then, at 7:14 p.m., her front door opened. Brenda emerged, holding her recycling bin. She marched down her driveway, her eyes fixed forward in her usual determined manner. She didn't notice at first. She got to the curb, put the bin down, and turned around. And then she saw it. It was a moment I will treasure for the rest of my days. Her body went completely rigid. Her mouth fell open. The clipboard she was inexplicably still carrying slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the concrete. She just stood there, frozen, for what felt like a full minute, her brain trying to process the gnomish apocalypse that had materialized across the street. The carefully curated, beige harmony of Pleasant Meadows had been shattered by an army of grinning, pointy-hatted delinquents. Her head slowly swiveled from left to right, taking in the full scale of the invasion. Her gaze landed on the mooning gnome. I saw her flinch, as if he'd shot her with a tiny ceramic arrow. Her face, which had been pale with shock, turned a deep, blotchy red. She didn't scream. She didn't shout. She did something far more terrifying. She composed herself. She bent down, picked up her clipboard with a shaky hand, turned on her heel, and marched back inside her house. The door slammed shut with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. I knew what that meant. She wasn't retreating. She was reloading. The next morning, another crisp white envelope was waiting for me. This one had clearly been typed in a furious rage. The font was bigger. Some words were in bold and underlined. Immediate and final notice. Violation of Bylaw Section C. Paragraph 12. Subsection B has escalated. You are in violation of 99 additional infractions. A fine of 100 PRINFRACN asterisk operator risher bilovide for a total of asterisk operator 9000 NINEHUNDREDOLLRS 100 PRINFRACN asterisk operator risher bilovide for a total of asterisk operator 9000 NINEHUNDREDOLLRS 9900. Furthermore, you are in violation of paragraph 18, creating a neighborhood nuisance, and paragraph 22, unauthorized alteration of landscape. All unapproved items must be removed within 48 hours, or the board will authorize their forced removal at your expense, and legal action will be pursued to the fullest extent of the law. $9,900. I had to admit, that was impressive. She wasn't messing around, but neither was I. This is where my plan moved into its second phase. You see, I had done more than just order gnomes that night. I had also ordered a copy of the complete, unabridged, 300-page Pleasant Meadows HOA bylaws, and I had read every single, mind-numbingly boring word of it. I'd spent 2 entire nights with a highlighter and a pot of coffee, dissecting that document like it was a sacred text. And I had found things. Brenda was counting on me to be intimidated by the big number. She was counting on me to fold under the threat of lawyers. What she wasn't counting on was that her own rulebook was a mess of contradictions, vague language, and, most importantly, exploitable loopholes. My first move was to respond to her letter. I didn't get angry. I got bureaucratic. I drafted my own official-looking letter, citing the bylaws right back at her. Dear HOA Board, I wrote, regarding your notice dated October 26th, per Section F, Paragraph 4, violation notices must be specific and individual. The bundling of multiple alleged infractions into a single fine is not permitted. Therefore, I will require a separate, individually documented notice for each of the 99 alleged violations. Please provide photographic evidence for each specific unapproved item, its exact location via GPS coordinates, and a detailed explanation of how each one, individually, lowers the aesthetic harmony of the community. I continued. Furthermore, regarding the claim of unauthorized alteration of landscape under paragraph 22, I refer you to subsection D, which states that the removal of grass for the installation of mulch beds under 50% of total lawn area does not require pre-approval. My new mulch bed constitutes 48.7% of my front lawn. I have the receipts and a surveyor's map to prove it. My final point was the masterpiece. Finally, regarding section C, paragraph 12, the bylaw on lawn and garden ornaments, you have misquoted it. The bylaw states that permanent statuary or fountains require approval. The document provides no definition for the term permanent. These items are not cemented into the ground and can be moved at any time. Therefore, they are by definition temporary decorations. And per section H, paragraph 7, temporary seasonal decorations do not require committee approval. I looked at my gnome army. And what season is it? I asked them aloud. It's gnome season. I printed the letter, put it in a crisp white envelope, and hand-delivered it right back to Brenda's doormat. Checkmate. The neighborhood was buzzing. My gnome-pocalypse had become local legend. People were driving by just to see it. It turned out, a lot of people were tired of Brenda's beige reign of terror. I became a reluctant folk hero. Arthur started calling me the Commander-in-Chief. People would drop off little gifts for the gnomes, tiny sunglasses, a miniature six-pack of beer. It was becoming a community project. Brenda was silent for 2 days. I knew I had her tied up in her own red tape. To provide the documentation I requested would take her weeks of painstaking work. And she knew I was right about the loopholes. But I wasn't done. Reading the bylaws, I had discovered the nuclear option. According to Section B, Paragraph 2, special meetings of the HOA can be called by any member, provided they submit a petition signed by 15% of the homeowners. And Paragraph 3 stated that a vote of no confidence in a board member or the entire board can be placed on the agenda of a special meeting. The final piece of my plan clicked into place. This was never just about the gnomes. It was about freeing Pleasant Meadows from tyranny. I spent the next week walking the neighborhood. I went door to door, not with a complaint, but with a simple question. I told my story. I showed them Brenda's threatening letters and my calm, rule-based responses. And then I showed them the petition. I talked to the man whose birdbath was 2 inches too tall. I talked to the family who was fined because their kid's basketball hoop was left out overnight. I talked to the woman who was told her wind chimes were a noise pollutant. For every house, there was a story of petty tyranny and joyless rules. My gnome army wasn't an insult. It was a symbol of rebellion that everyone had been too afraid to start themselves. Getting the signatures was easy. I needed 30. I got 75. I filed the petition for a special meeting. On the agenda, a vote of no confidence in President Brenda and the entire Architectural Control Committee. The night of the meeting was electric. The community clubhouse was packed. It was the biggest turnout anyone had ever seen. Brenda and the 2 other board members sat at a table at the front, looking grim. My gnome army stood silent vigil at my home, their little painted-on smiles a symbol of our cause. When the floor opened for discussion, it was like a dam breaking. One by one, my neighbors stood up and told their stories. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment came pouring out. Brenda tried to argue, tried to cite rules, but the momentum was against her. Her power was built on intimidation and apathy, and now she was facing an organized, empowered community. Finally, it was time to vote. It was a simple show of hands, all in favor of the motion of no confidence in the current board. A forest of hands went up, mine included. I looked at Arthur, and he gave me a huge, teary-eyed smile. It was nearly unanimous. Brenda just sat there, her face ashen. Her reign was over. Her beige kingdom had crumbled. In the weeks that followed, a new, interim board was elected. The first thing they did was suspend a dozen of the most ridiculous bylaws for review, including the one on garden ornaments. Arthur was put in charge of the new architectural committee. His first act was to approve his own birdbath. My lawn remained a tourist attraction for a while, a monument to the great gnomish uprising of Pleasant Meadows. Eventually, I did scale it back. I kept Norman, of course, and about a dozen of his most trusted friends. I found good homes for the others with my neighbors, who were now proudly displaying their own little symbols of freedom on their lawns. Every now and then, I see Brenda driving through the neighborhood. She never looks at my house. She just stares straight ahead, at a world that is no longer hers to control. And as for me, I found that fighting for that little spark of joy, that memory of my wife, ended up bringing joy back to the entire community. All because a petty tyrant picked a fight with the wrong man and his gnome.